All right, welcome everybody to According to Andrew number 20, which I should have done yesterday, but I'm glad I waited. Which is going into the Trilemma Objection. Somebody wrote into Vox Day's, to Vox Day, and he published it on his blog, and I thought he did a really good job in his response. So I'm going to use his reasoning as a basis for why I think he's correct, because I think the idea that there is this trilemma is kind of bunk. And then we'll also go into something else that is also deemed a trilemma or some kind of rational argument, which is called Epicureans Paradox, which I don't believe is actually a paradox. So we'll get into that as well. But first, we have to go through all this stuff. So if you didn't read these yesterday, Vox had posted a blog post by a or part of a blog post by a guy named Alexander Marcus, named "The Horrors of Munchhausen." It's German. I'm gonna have a hard time pronouncing this. Munchhausen Trilemma. Let me see if that's how you pronounce this.
Munchhausen.
Oh, okay. So it's like the syndrome. Munchhausen. All right. Yeah. It's what happens when you read things and you're just like, that's a complex word. I'm just going to file that into the complex word thing and not figure out how to pronounce it. Anyway, so Munchhausen's trilemma. So, his, he basically says there's three, like proofs, and that they're all unsatisfactory. So the first one is a circular argument in which proof of some proposition is supported only by that proposition. A regressive argument in which each proof requires further proof ad infinitum, or a dogmatic argument which rests on accepted precepts which are merely asserted rather than defended. The last one I think is incorrect. Um, I don't think this is actually a dilemma, and I think that the last one is correct, but that's what this whole thing's about, so we'll get into that. The Munchhausen trilemma establishes the basis for three prevailing theories of justification used in contemporary analytical philosophy. Coherentism, infinitism, and foundationalism. Coherentism, my bad. I apparently need to learn how to pronounce things. A theory of justification is briefly an explanation of why beliefs can be deemed true. Coherentism is presently much in vogue. It is the story of justification relied upon by much of postmodern thought. It's the circular reasoning. So he gives an example. Donald Trump is racist. How do you know he's racist? Because Donald Trump hates black people. How do you know he hates black people? Because all racists do. You know, obviously they make it a little bit more flowery than that, but that's basically it. The second one is infinitism, and apparently he didn't give a good example of this, so I can't really define this very well. But apparently it's not something that a lot of people use. It's not widely supported. Those that call themselves infinites hold that evidential ancestry of a justified belief must be infinite and non-repeating. I'm not even sure what that's supposed to mean. But he doesn't really argue that one very much. The main two that are going head to head because of our current culture war are coherentism and foundationalism. So let's go into foundationalism. Foundationalism argues that all propositions fundamentally depend on certain fundamental axioms, which are asserted rather than proved. As foundationalism holds that certain beliefs can be and are justified without reference to other beliefs, historically, foundationalism has been the core justification used in Western thought over 2,000 years. And the only reason for that is because you can't have logic without foundationalism. But we'll get into that. And then he goes on, contemporary right-wing thinking is largely foundationalist, and it is against foundationalism that postmoderns aimed their weapons. Thinkers such as Richard Rorty, Jacques Derrida, and Donald Davidson asserted that only belief can be a reason for another belief, holding that a proposition is only justified in reference to other propositions, e.g., coherentism, as described above. Postmodernists thus deny the validity of foundationalism, upon which uphold coherentism. We'll get into that. So then he gets into Munchhausen's trilemma is actually Agrippa's trilemma, but he defines it a little bit differently. He has a circulatory. The truth asserted involves a circulatory proofs, post ad progress ad infinitum. The truth asserted rests on truths themselves in need of proof, and so on to infinity. And assumption, the truth is based on an unsupported assumption. However it is phrased, the trilemma presents the choice of three equally unsatisfied options, or so it is claimed. Again, claimed. In this case, perhaps one of the three options is not equally unsatisfied, and there are good reasons for adopting one of these three. But before we delve into that, let's first explain why it matters, and then he goes on for stuff. You can look into that. We're going to skip ahead a little bit. So, here's where we get kind of the crux of the thing. The Munchhausen Trilemma holds that the foundation is merely one of three equally unsatisfying resolutions to the impossibility of proving any truth. And if there is no possibility of proving any truth, it would seem that there is no possibility of justifying the culture of any society as good, beautiful, or right. The problem is, that is a foundational statement. Therefore, you just invalidated your entire argument. Because here's the problem with trying to combat foundationalism, is they always have to use foundationalism to combat it. And the difference is, if you use circular logic, you can use foundationalism to combat it. When you're trying to combat foundationalism, you have to use foundationalism because it's the only basis for logic. So you have to use it. So, but what they'll try to do is they'll try to use it and obscure the fact that they're using it, or throw you off their tail, kind of thing. But they'll use it to make the argument against foundationalism and say this other thing's correct. But you can't actually just use like coherentism itself to prove that foundationalism isn't true. It's a, never-ending spiral. Never-ending spiral that really never really gets there. So that's the important things from that article that we're going to look at. So then in his next article, he gets into tackling the trilemma. He kind of looks at a bunch of different stuff. And this, I think, he kind of gets... The thing is, if you don't catch that initial trick, it actually reminds me a lot of math problems that I had in college. So I had this professor, and he... and the math problems were actually like a puzzle, like a riddle. And we weren't actually being tested on how to do calculus. We were being tested on how many of these obscure math tricks do you remember and know. Because if you knew this little math trick, the entire problem was super simple. And I think this kind of is the same thing that falls in with these logic things. Is if you know their kind of game plan, their trick, they just don't work. So a good example of this is... a good kind of way to think about this is a morphing of what Solzhenitsyn said about in his rule for radicals. So he said, make them use their own rules against them, and you kind of want to do that where, but it's a little different. It's use their own rules against them, and don't let them use your rules against you. Right? If they say they believe in circular logic, all right, then you have to argue everything with circular logic, and you have to make a solid logical case with that. And you can't, because it's circular logic. It is illogical. So their entire thing will fall apart, right? So what they'll do is they'll say Western civilization is the worst, and then use all of the tools that Western civilization has built, and things like logic and all the things that created it to destroy your argument or whatever, and then they'll be like, see, you're the worst kind of thing. And it's like, well, if you don't believe in any of that stuff, you don't get to use those tools. So anyway, it's interesting. Um, do do do. All right, so we'll get into his tackling Alex Marcus's tackling the trilemma in a second, because I think that kind of gets us off of the trail of what we really want to do. So let's get into an objection to the trilemma mailbox that was just sent in, because I thought he did a really good job. So DSG objects to the philosophical concepts of Munchhausen Trilemma posted without comment. So DSC, thank you very much for your commentary. You did a better job than I ever could have. So he says, I object to the notion of what is called fundamentalism is no better than epistemological is no better an epistemological foundation than the other two parts of the trilemma. Why does chemistry, physics, and biology involve so much lab-based education? Seeing something firsthand offers the hope that a person can better delineate between the realm of conjecture and real reality. The stuff that doesn't give a fig what you think. I find the older I get, the more an empiricist I become. While I find a broad personal experience in a minute on minute part of the whole world. I base my pyramids of trust on people whose primary premises matches up with my own personal experiences, those who have little first-hand experience, and anything must have little data on which to base their pyramids of trust on. I aver that there are four kinds of questions: those that are answered by logic, those where experiments yields what is essentially certain, and those that yield answers that can never be better than today's best guess, and those that cannot be answered with empiricism at all. And now we'll get into some examples. As you know, some things are true by axiom. Example: a consumable cannot be consumed and still remain available for consumption. These axioms are the foundation for which Hans Hermann Hoppe describes his essay, The Democratic Leviathan. Hard science rests on experiments where the outcome is the same no matter how many times one considers repeating it, while dropping a stone 1,000 times to see if it may fall. Someone to post that on the 1,001th try it will rise when released. Such a belief is clearly irrational. Much of today's science, as you know, as you've well described, falls into the third category. It is a realm of statistical study where confidence intervals, Poisson distributions, and student test levels. The 95% confidence interval, of course, posits that a hypothesis that 19/20ths there are 19/20ths likely to be true. This is not remotely the same standard as category 2 above. Vast amounts of social science attempt to mimic the style of study, but there is no substance to it at all. The real science, in my view, is that where variables can actually be controlled, a condition that is laughably absent in the vast amount of what today is billed as science. What happens to us when we die? Do we have consciousness beyond our own physical envelope? Is there life on a distant planet? What color is a viron? And if we see it, is it like a golf ball? What would it look like? These are a myriad of other questions that cannot be answered via empiricism. Provided systematic answers to empirically answered questions is the providence of religion. Today's equalist religious cult is particularly odd in that most of its dogma and sacraments are actually at odds with empirically derived reality. It is thus a pure existence of power. Orwell illustrated with O'Brien's forces Smith to see a different number of fingers than O'Brien extends. The first step towards wisdom comes by calling things their right names. And then if we jump down a little bit, he says, reality exists. The notion that people see different things when observing the same thing is baloney. If I drop a golf ball and simultaneously launch one horizontally, they will always hit the floor at the same time, no matter who insists with a great fervor that the dropped one lands first. Um, so, and you can read the rest of it. I'll link all of these articles in the description of the YouTube, um, so you guys can check that out. But that's kind of a summary of what he said, and I thought that was really well articulated because it doesn't get wrapped up in all this like confusing stuff where it's just like to act like there isn't a real thing. Like I'm not holding a bottle cap right now, which you can't see obviously. And the only time that you kind of get like there's a bit of haziness is like that description of a blind man describing an elephant. So you have five blind men that are describing an elephant, and one says it's this, and another says it's that, and it's just because they're feeling different parts of the elephant, and so they came to different conclusions. And there's plenty of aspects of life where that is true, but there are also plenty of aspects of life where there is an undeniable reality to what there is. You know, and his example of gravity is perfect. Even if there might be disagreements on how gravity acts, the idea that there isn't something that's holding us to this earth is obviously not true. So, let's get into what Alexander Marcus, is it Marcus? Macrease. It's a weird way of spelling it. Anyway, what he did. So here are some of the objections to this whole idea. So there's four schools he puts forth: the pragmatic, the Straussian, Nietzschean, and the Randian. And he basically says Rand is Aristotle, or not Aristotle, but she actually falls in the Aristotle camp. We'll get into that later. So he says fallibilists claim that we do not need to abandon our knowledge, merely accept that knowledge is fallible. And this goes against his first objective. Yeah, there might be fallible things, but with enough empirical evidence for certain things, there is known truths. Pragmatism ultimately collapses into irrationality, which leads to the very sort of post-truth society that we seek to avoid, is the problem with fallibilism. And then he also states that Western civilization took a wrong turn in the Enlightenment when it foolishly tried to found its culture on explicitly rational views. And the issue with this is, you know, the idea that you can always dig deeper, right? If you don't found things in the metaphysical world, there's always going to be, it's like the atom is a great example. Atom is the smallest thing. Then we find subatomic particles. And it's like, well, okay, then like it's smaller and smaller, and then eventually it gets down to like vibrating strings. And even going back to the Big Bang theory that they claim, you know, the question becomes, well, how did the Big Bang happen? Who created the start of everything? And I guess this gets into the infinite argument, where the scientists are just like, everything's existed forever, and it always has. And it's just like, that's not how this works. You know, we're not in a metaphysical realm. We're in a physical realm. In the metaphysical realm, that might be able to be true. But that's not what we live in. Because time exists. Whereas in a metaphysical realm, time might not exist. And therefore, the idea of infinite, something always existing, is kind of how it has to work. I know that's kind of a weird statement, but so yeah, so okay, so that's the fallibist. Then the Nietzsche takes a crack at it, does the same issue of like saying there is no such thing as truth, which has to be a true statement for it to mean anything, therefore invalidating his entire argument. So he says, the truth is actually a sum of human relations which have been enhanced, transposed, and embellished poetically and rhetorically, and which find, after long use, see firm, canonical, and obligatory to people. Truths are illusions by which one has forgotten that this is what they are. Metaphors which are worn out and without censorious powers, coins which have lost their pictures and now matter only as a metal, no longer as coin. And, you know, people forgetting their cultural heritage is a problem. But just because cultural heritage isn't necessarily bound in truth that lasts forever doesn't mean that some things are. Like, yeah, the coin loses its face value, but the coin never stopped being metal, whether or not it was a coin or whether it is a worn coin, to the point that it is just metal now. It is metal. It always will be metal. It is, like, I guess it can change with rust and stuff like that, but it, you know, it's the idea that, like, it just magically changes because is nonsense. So he says, what we must do, Nietzsche says Nietzsche, is create a new narrative and a new culture. It does not matter if the narrative is true. It absolutely does. There is no such thing. Right there, contradictory statement. They just do it all over the place. And okay, so now we're gonna jump down to, and then there's Aristotle. Did I miss a school? I think I missed Strauss. Oh, okay, my bad. I blended Strauss and Fallibism. So the pragmatists slash Fallibists believe that we can't truly know anything and we're fallible. And then Strauss believed that we made a wrong turn by making everything rational. And the problem with that is the metaphysical split that I talked about. So okay, so that covers those three, and then we get down to Rand, which is, he basically doesn't even touch Rand and just goes with Aristotle. So I don't know why he didn't just call it Aristotle's stuff, but so basically Aristotle was a foundationalist, and his foundational argument was rational foundationalism asserts that all propositions fundamentally depend on certain unprovable axioms. And see, I don't know if that's true. And I haven't read Aristotle enough to know if that's actually what he said. Empirical foundationalism asserts that propositions are fundamentally justified non-positionally by perception, and Aristotle foundationalism incorporates elements of both rationalism and empiricism. So basically, high-order concepts can be justified by low-order concepts. Low-order concepts can be justified by perception. Perceptions can be justified by direct knowledge of reality. So basically, an example for this is, you know what A is, and you know what A is not. So from there, you can create a low-order concept of X is either A or not A. And then from that, you can build higher-order things like algebra and stuff like that. Aristotle argued that our perceptions give us direct knowledge of the world. It does. A position today known as direct realism. Direct realism, not coincidentally, leads itself to the classic correspondence theory of truth, where a statement is true if it accurately reflects the statement of affairs of the world. I don't know why this would be controversial. Obviously, with people who are satanic and want to knock down Western civilization, because this is a founding pillar of Western civilization, I personally probably think civilization, period, that they would want to go against this. But basically, he grounded his stuff in some hypermorphic metaphysics and physics, and I don't even know what the heck, how to define that stuff very well, so we're just going to leave it there, which I probably should have just left this article for another video or something. But let's get on into the other interesting topic, which is, boom, the Epicurean Paradox. I'm going to bring it up here. So, hopefully you guys can read that. This is another paradox that assumes a couple of things that aren't true. So anyway, let's just go through it. So we got evil exists. Yes. Can God prevent evil? It says no. Then God is not all powerful. If yes, does God know about all the evil? Okay, we're gonna use this in class. We're basing this on Christianity, just to let you know. Christian thought of how we're going against this. So, can God prevent evil? Yes, he can. He chooses not to. But he will defeat evil at the end of all time, right? That's part of the whole every knee will bow kind of thing. You know, he's allowing us to be tested right now. Okay, so next one. Does God know about all the evil? Yes. And if he didn't, then God is not all-knowing. Nowhere in the Bible does it say he's all-knowing or he actually wants to be all-knowing. It doesn't actually matter if he's all-knowing. I don't think. I could be wrong on that. Does God want to prevent evil? Yes. If no, then God is not good. God is not loving. He wants to prevent evil, but he wants to have us have free will. So that's the next part. Does God want to prevent evil? Yes. Then why is there evil? So this is where we get a branching path here, and we get to test us. And then he says, if God is all-knowing, he would know what we would do if we were tested. Therefore, no need to test us. Which I don't understand how this is an argument. First off, it's not assumed that he's all-knowing. Second off, just because we are being tested, it doesn't mean that the idea that we could potentially pass doesn't mean that we don't need to be tested. Like, what if it's a 50-50 coin flip? And he can be all-knowing and know, okay, well, if I put this test against him, he'll potentially pass. And it's like the idea that it's like weightlifting, right? It's like, oh, well, he would only ever put challenges in front of us that we could pass. Just take any video game that you've played. Maybe I'm not speaking to the right crowd here, but I just finished The Witcher, right? And I enjoyed that game, but the last half of the game was kind of boring because it was too easy. People want a challenge. Life is a challenge. That is part of the enjoyment of life. If God didn't test us and didn't put any of these challenges in our life, life would be boring. And I know when I'm in the middle of a test, I'm not always the most happy about it, and I'm like, come on. But it builds us, it makes us better. The idea that we wouldn't be given a test. Sometimes we're given a test intentionally made to fail, so that we have to get back up on our feet, and be shown how much farther we have to go still, right? Let's say I try to run 5 miles today. I know I can't run 5 miles. And I'm like, oh man, that's going to take a lot of work to get that far. But now I have a goal, and I work up to it, and eventually I can run 5 miles. And that initial failure showed me how far I have to go before I can reach that thing. And then I finally reach it, and I'm like, all right, good. And now I set a new goal, 10 miles or something. I don't know. I'm not running 10 miles, though. I'll tell you that right now. All right, so back to then why is there evil? Satan, an all-powerful, all-knowing God, could and would destroy Satan, and he does eventually, but just because he hasn't right now doesn't invalidate God. Then, okay, why is there evil? It is necessary for the universe to exist, or other reasons. Could God have created a universe without these? So we have no, and then that goes back to then God is not all-powerful. And here's another thing I want to push back on. So there was a really good, my parents shared it with me years ago, where they argued that like God created evil and stuff like that, and I don't picture it that way. I picture it as like God being the one who creates rules, right? He created the rule book and then enforces the rules, right? And so if you don't follow the rule book, in a kind of pseudo sense, he created like the he created evil, but um it was really put really well where somebody said, why does God create evil basically? And his pushback was, well, when it gets cold out, um is there an increase in cold or is there a lack of heat? And those of you familiar with science, it's, there is no such thing as cold necessarily. There's just more or less heat in a given area that creates warmth. So, the statement is, okay, well, there's not more cold, there's just less heat. And so, like, when there's more evil, it's not that there's uh, uh, more evil necessarily, there's just less God, right? There's less people being godly, following the ways of God and stuff like that. And that's why you get these kind of situations. But anyway, going back to have God created the universe without these? Then we have yes. Why didn't he? God could have created a universe with free will. Uh, could God have created a universe with free will but without evil? And the answer is no, because if uh, so there's yes, and then there's why didn't he, and then free will. It's just kind of like a loop. Um, and then there's the to test us, and we already went through that. So, um, free will inherently means that there has to be a wrong choice, right? Or you don't have free will. If you can't ever make a wrong choice, then you're not actually making a choice, right? Um, in a sense, you are making a choice when you're like, okay, do I want to eat like an apple or an orange, right? And there's no moral decision on that necessarily. Um, but I don't think the decisions are like that when it comes to free will. It's like the decision to eat or not eat, and the option is living more or death. It's like uh those are kind of like the free will decisions that you're left with, and that uh those decisions can't be taken away from you, or you don't have free will, right? If the whole idea of like you can bring a horse to water but you can't make it drink, like if you could make it drink, then it wouldn't have free will, right? And then that kind of defeats the whole purpose of like this whole realm that we exist in. Um, so I don't know. That's my 2 cents on those two trilemmas or paradoxes. And I thought it was interesting to share with you guys. So hopefully you guys thought it interesting as well. Anyway, thanks for everybody who is listening. Um, if you have your own takes on this, leave comments down below. I'd love to hear them. Anyway, like and subscribe if you want to hear more from me, and hopefully you guys have a good day. Have a good one.